Chapter 2. Studying the Self. By the end of the chapter, you should be able to define self-schema and identify how self-schemas influence memory and behavior. Describe what self-esteem is and what we know about it. Define self-efficacy. Compare public self-awareness and private self-awareness. Explain the concept of self-serving bias. Identify why impression management is important. Describe why people might engage in behaviors that are self-defeating. Understand the power of roles. Discuss how self-regulation occurs. Describe how the self influences actions. Think back to your last job interview. What did the interviewer ask you? If you have been through a number of interviewers, have you noticed any common questions? Job applicants are often asked to describe themselves in a job interview. Describing one's strengths and weaknesses is also common. What do you think a job interviewer is trying to find out by asking these questions? Who am I? Tell us about yourself is a popular interviewer request. If you were asked to answer the question, who are you? How would you answer it? Psychologists have long explored our views of ourself and how we come to those views. Self-concept is the collection of things you know about yourself, such as your overall cognitive understanding, learned beliefs, attitudes, and opinions about yourself. When you answer the question, who am I?, you are describing your self-concept. Self-schema. Job interviewers obviously think a question about applicants' views of themselves is important, or they would not ask. Social psychologists agree that someone's description of the self is important. The collection of things we know about ourselves are not just a random collection of facts and beliefs. Human beings, or at least the brains of human beings, like organization and pattern. We naturally categorize and organize information that comes into our environment. Schemas are organized packages of information. You may recognize this term if you have taken a developmental psychology course. For example, you know that dogs are furry, have 4 legs, and bark. Your schema of a dog is a barking 4-legged furry animal. We have schemas about ourselves as well. Self-schemas are knowledge structures about the self. Although sometimes the terms self-schema and self-concept are used interchangeably, self-schemas organize and help us use the vast amounts of information within the self-concept. Because they organize and help us use the information about ourselves, self-schemas affect how we view the world. For example, would you describe yourself as an exerciser? Do you like to keep in shape, stay physically active, and work out regularly? If so, you have an exercise self-schema. Researchers consider schemas to be on a continuum, so if your responses to the above questions were absolutely not, you would have a non-exercise self-schema. For those of you in the middle, researchers would call you aschematic in regards to a self-schema for exercise. Aschematic simply means without schema. In general, individuals who have a self-schema for exercise are quicker to respond to stimuli that pertains to their schema, energetic, are able to provide more examples of behaviors that relate to their schema, and are more likely to choose and do behaviors in accord with that schema, participate in an exercise program. Reacting to things related to the self in this way leads to the self-reference effect, our tendency to remember better those things we have related to ourselves. For example, you might remember that Joelle has a blue car like yours, but not remember what color car Shauna drives, because it is different from yours. We often think about ourselves and relate things to ourselves, and this appears to be a good strategy for memory. As you study, keeping the self-reference effect in mind may be helpful. Relate new material to your life, and when it is time to remember it later, you will be more likely to be able to come up with it. Cultural influences. How do you know what to say when asked by an interviewer to describe yourself? Where does our self-knowledge come from? Our sense of self is something we develop. This sense of self continues to change over our lifetimes. One large impact on the development of our self-concepts is our culture. Cultures vary greatly in a variety of ways, but one large difference is in the way cultures view the self and connections with others. In independent cultures, people are viewed as separate, unique individuals whose qualities are independent of their social connections. In interdependent or collectivistic cultures, people are viewed as enmeshed within social connections, such that the person cannot be described adequately without social context and connections. Some of the differences between these cultures are summarized in Table 2.1 in your text. When individuals from an interdependent culture are asked to write down statements in response to the question, "Who am I?" they tend to include more role-specific and concrete information. For example, a Korean student might write that she is silly when with friends. People from independent cultures respond with more trait or attribute characterizations. An American might write that he is artistic. Notice how the individual from an interdependent culture included contexts with friends when describing herself, but the person from an independent culture did not. Thinking about the self. In a job interview, someone might ask you to describe your strengths and weaknesses. Along with knowing who you are, interviewers want to know how you evaluate yourself. Like interviewers, researchers are also interested in our evaluations of ourselves, both qualities we believe we have and actions we believe we can do. How much focus we place on these aspects of ourselves, our awareness, does vary. In this section, we will investigate our evaluations of the self and our awareness of various aspects of the self. Self-esteem. If you answered the question, "Who am I?" it is likely you listed some things about yourself that you liked. "I am helpful," and some things you didn't like. "I get angry easily." Your overall evaluation of these qualities, or how you emotionally feel or value yourself, is your self-esteem. Self-esteem, at least theoretically, is on a continuum from very high, individuals who think very well of themselves, to very low, individuals who think very poorly of themselves. When we look at our actual self-esteem scores, however, most people feel pretty good about themselves. Low self-esteem usually manifests itself as feeling okay about oneself, rather than feeling terrible. Self-esteem is related to confidence and happiness. People with high self-esteem are more likely to take initiative, speak up in social situations, make friends, and take risks. There is a dark side to high self-esteem. Those with high self-esteem may take more risks and therefore get better jobs or have more adventuresome travel experiences. But risks also include experimentation with drugs and risky sexual practices. People with high self-esteem are happier than those with low self-esteem. Individuals with low self-esteem are more vulnerable to depression. This vulnerability seems to be independent of the stressful events one experiences. It appears that how you view the qualities you possess, how you value yourself, affects your tendency toward depression. People with high self-esteem also report a number of things people with low self-esteem do not. For example, those with high self-esteem report being smarter, better liked by others, and better looking. Yet researchers find that when people with high self-esteem are given IQ tests, their friends are surveyed, and their attractiveness is judged by others. None of these hold true. People with high self-esteem believe these things to be true of themselves, but objectively, they are not. Self-esteem is related to academic success. Individuals with high self-esteem tend to have higher grades than those with lower self-esteem. As you read this, keep in mind what we talked about in the first chapter about correlation. Does having a high self-esteem help one get better grades Or does getting better grades help raise one's self-esteem? Correlation is not causation. Just because self-esteem is related to academic success does not mean that raising self-esteem causes a rise in grades. When researchers looked more deeply into this relationship and did some experiments to sort out causality, they found that activities to raise self-esteem, like giving children prizes for nothing in particular, are unlikely to affect grades. A blue ribbon for simply being in the classroom will not necessarily raise self-esteem. It seems that the relationship between self-esteem and academic success exists because higher grades give self-esteem a boost rather than the other way around. Given this, it would be a better idea to hire a tutor for your child to raise his or her grades and thus self-esteem than to attempt to raise the child's self-esteem with the hopes of raising grades. Our self-esteem levels are attuned to our social standing. According to the sociometer theory of self-esteem, one's level of self-esteem rises and falls with feelings of acceptance and rejection from those in that person's social world. For example, if you have searched for a job and were unsuccessful, it is likely your self-esteem fell. Starting a new job would likely provide a self-esteem boost. Although self-esteem is a global evaluation of oneself, in this context, all aspects of the person are not created equal. Our self-esteem is more closely related to the things on which social acceptance is based. Researchers have found that outward qualities like popularity and attractiveness are more important to social acceptance and therefore self-esteem than communal qualities like kindness, supportiveness, and honesty. So people who view themselves as popular would have higher self-esteem than if they believe they are unpopular, no matter what they believe about their kindness and honesty. This holds true generally, but not always. For those in roles or cultures where communal qualities are more valued, honesty, supportiveness, and kindness tend to rise in importance in determining self-esteem. Self-efficacy. While self-esteem deals with your evaluation of the qualities you possess, another concept focuses on your evaluation of your abilities. If you have been interviewed, it is likely that you are asked whether you could work as a team or complete assignments on time, or do any number of other activities. Your evaluation of your ability to perform particular tasks is called self-efficacy. Have you ever read the children's book, The Little Engine That Could? In this book, a small train engine pulling a train loaded with animals attempts to climb a mountain. As the engine puffs up the hill, she says, "I think I can, I think I can, I think I can." This mantra is the essence of self-efficacy. A belief that we can do something is generally good for us. Individuals with higher self-efficacy are more persistent, more productive, and less depressed. Self-efficacy beliefs vary depending on the behavior. Someone might have high self-efficacy for academics, but low self-efficacy for athletics. Because we have a sense of self-efficacy for any behavior we might engage in, self-efficacy can get pretty specific. Researchers have studied everything from leadership self-efficacy to bicultural self-efficacy, harm reduction self-efficacy in drug abusers, and driver competence self-efficacy. In a job search, it is likely that your job search self-efficacy would come into play. Self-awareness. The degree to which we are aware of ourselves or particular aspects of